1 Corinthians 10, 1 through 12 says this, "For I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank from the same spiritual drink. For they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. Nevertheless, with most of them God was not pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now these things took place as examples for us, that we might not desire evil as they did. Do not be idolaters as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. We must not indulge in sexual immorality as some of them did, and 23,000 fell in a single day. We must not put Christ to the test as some of them did and were destroyed by serpents, nor grumble as some of them did and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now these things happened to them as an example, but they were written down for our instruction, on whom the end of the ages has come. Therefore, let anyone who thinks that he stands take heed lest he fall." Now, those are very important verses because they make us aware that much in the Old Testament is a great example for us. And unfortunately, a great deal of what we find in the Old Testament is an example for us of what not to do. Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians gives a list of a number of things that are found in the books of Exodus and Numbers. So today I want us to look at 1 Kings chapter 14 and ask the question, are we ever going to learn from the examples that we find? So if you'll turn to 1 Kings chapter 14. And we have two kings in this text. One of them is a new king for a new kingdom, and one of them is a newer king for an established kingdom. And they are here to be examples to us. And unfortunately, 1 Kings 14, they're going to be examples of what not to do, just like 1 Corinthians tells us. So in the first 20 verses of chapter 14, we find this new king who is the first king over a new kingdom, the 10 tribes in the north called Israel. So the Bible says at that time, Abijah, the son of Jeroboam, fell sick. And Jeroboam's the king. And Jeroboam said to his wife, "Arise and disguise yourself, that it not be known that you are the wife of Jeroboam, and go to Shiloh. Behold, Ahijah the prophet is there, who said of me that I should be king over this people. Take with you 10 loaves, some cakes, and a jar of honey, and go to him. He will tell you what shall happen to the child." Jeroboam's wife did so. She arose and went to Shiloh and came to the house of Ahijah. Now Ahijah could not see, for his eyes were dim because of his age. I'll let somebody say amen, because you can't see me, but you can hear me. Or you've been through surgeries and corrective lenses and all that. So we understand this, do we not? So he's gone blind because his eyes don't work anymore. So verse 5, the Lord said to Ahijah, "Behold, the wife of Jeroboam is coming to inquire of you concerning your son, for he is sick. Thus and thus shall you say to her." When she came, she pretended to be another woman. But when Ahijah heard the sound of her feet as she came in at the door, he said, "Come in, wife of Jeroboam. Why do you pretend to be another? For I am charged with unbearable news for you. Go tell Jeroboam, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, because I exalted you from among the people and made you leader over my people Israel, and tore the kingdom away from the house of David and gave it to you. And yet you have not been like my servant David, who kept my commandments and followed me with all his heart, doing only that which was right in my eyes. But you have done evil above all who were before you, and have gone and made for yourself other gods and metal images, provoking me to anger, and have cast me behind your back. Therefore, behold, I will bring harm upon the house of Jeroboam, and will cut off from Jeroboam every male, both bond and free in Israel, and will burn up the house of Jeroboam as a man burns up dung until it is all gone. Anyone belonging to Jeroboam who dies in the city, the dogs will eat, and anyone who dies in the open country, the birds of the heavens shall eat, for the Lord has spoken it. Arise therefore, go to your house. When your feet enter the city, the child shall die. And all Israel shall mourn from him and bury him, for he only of Jeroboam shall come to the grave, because in him there is found something pleasing to the Lord, the God of Israel, in the house of Jeroboam. Moreover, the Lord will raise up for himself a king over Israel, who shall cut off the house of Jeroboam today and henceforth. The Lord will strike Israel as a reed is shaken in the water, and root up Israel out of this good land that he gave to their fathers, and scatter them beyond the Euphrates, because they have made their Ashram, provoking the Lord to anger. And he will get Israel up because of the sins of Jeroboam, which he sinned and made Israel to sin. Then Jeroboam's wife arose and departed and came to Tirzah. And as she came to the threshold of the house, the child died. And all Israel buried him and mourned for him, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke by his servant Ahijah the prophet. Now the rest of the acts of Jeroboam, how he warred and how he reigned, behold, they are written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel. And the time that Jeroboam reigned was 22 years, and he slept with his fathers, and Nadab his son reigned in his place. Now, as many stories go, we have a setup in this account. And the setup is Jeroboam says to his wife, look, our son's sick. I want you to go down to the prophet, but I want you to disguise yourself like somebody else. You do realize how foolish this is, right? We're talking about you're going to a prophet to ask him to predict the future, and you're going to try to disguise yourself. Here's the way one commentator named Jameson put it. He said, it's strange to suppose that the God who could reveal the future could not penetrate a flimsy disguise. I mean, I don't know what he's thinking. But anyway, he tells her, and he wants to complete the ruse. So notice what he tells her in verse 3, take 10 loaves. Now, when I think of loaf, you know what I think of? Wonder bread. That's a loaf. I mean, but actually in the Bible, loaves were more like a round cake sort of thing. And they were usually very, very thin. And so you could eat one or two with any meal. Basically what you do is you take them and tear them, and you dip them down into the good sauce, and you would eat it. Just like people still do today. Except I prefer to dip chicken in the sauce. But regardless, it's still the same principle. And so he says, take 10 loaves, a few cakes, and a jar of honey. This is not what a king would offer to the prophet. But if you're going to pretend not to be the king's wife, then you can't offer a king's ransom. At least not that you halfway understand. So I don't have to try to cover it all again, and we're here all day. Yeah. So dress up and then take what just a common person would probably take to the prophet. And so verse 4 tells us that she did so, but God knows exactly what's happening. And so he gives this warning to Ahijah and says, this is what I want you to say to her. And so she shows up, and it's very fascinating to me. She never says a word during the whole thing. I'm sure as she has journeyed to Shiloh to meet Ahijah the prophet, she has rehearsed what she's going to say, wouldn't you? My child is sick, and I was wondering if I get a word from the Lord, if you would pray for my child or something, like that. So I'm sure she's got a speech rehearsed. But when you show up, and before you even get into the door of the room where the prophet is, he says, hey, I know who you are. That would probably stop you from talking too. So through the whole account, she doesn't say anything. Ahijah the prophet's the one who is going to speak. And what does he say? He says, man, I want you to go home. I want you to tell your husband this. I want you to go home and tell the king. I did everything for him. He was just another dude, and I made him the king over 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel. I took 10 of them away from David, and I gave it to him. I've given him everything that he could possibly ask for. And how has he responded? He did not keep my commandments. Right here, verse 8, he did not keep my commandments like David, but instead he did evil. Verse 9, you did evil above all who are before you, have gone and made for yourselves. And then he gets kind of this list now. Gods and metal images provoking me to anger. I don't know what it's like to have God say you've done bad. To be honest with you, I don't know what it's like to have God say you've done good either. But someday we're going to stand before him. But can you imagine God come and say, look, what you've done is wrong. Now here's what many of us would respond with. Yes. I don't care if you're 80, you're still going to be like an 8-year-old in trouble. Yes. But can you imagine God saying, but no, wait, I want you to understand, you've done worse than anybody else. Or to put it in language to help you understand, you've done badder than anybody else. And now, so he doesn't just say your husband has done evil. He's done worse than anybody else that I could possibly imagine. He's made other gods and served them. He's put God, I've made this the worst thing he could possibly do. He's put God behind his back. Put behind your back and has provoked God to anger. So now we have a punishment. Men are going to die and not be buried. If you die in the city, the dogs will eat you. Now let's just kind of catch how it was in the ancient world, how it was actually through most of history. The streets were the garbage dump. So you have garbage, you dump it in the streets. And the dogs, packs of dogs would roam the streets and they would eat the garbage. The streets were the nastiest place in any city. They were filthy, they stunk, they were full of garbage and trash, and you got these wild packs of dogs roaming the streets, just scrounging off of what is there. That's why when the Bible says that heaven has streets of gold, it's so amazing. Basically what it says is the landfill of heaven is lined with gold. That's why John makes a big deal out in Revelation. So we have these nasty, filthy streets. So anybody who dies in the city, it's going to be just like the rest of the garbage. They're going to be eaten by the dogs. And if you die out in the field, then the crows are going to eat you. They'll probably pluck your eyeballs out first. Some of you really like that sort of image, and others of you go, bleh. All right, so they don't pluck the eyeballs out first. They chew the lips off. So he said that this is the first. These men are going to die, and they're all going to suffer much of this punishment. And then he says, here's the worst thing that's going to happen. When you get to your house, the child is going to die. Now that's a very severe punishment that happens in here. But I'm going to be honest with you. There's something in this text that puzzles me, that I find shocking, and it's found in verse 17. Jeroboam's wife arose and departed and came to Tirzah, and as she came to the threshold of the house, the child died. Now, I'm married to a mom, and if I could convince her to dress up like a poor beggar and to go to a prophet and go through all this, and the prophet said, when you get home, your child will die, I would get a text. The prophet said, if I come home, the child will die. I will never see you again. I don't know many moms that would go home. Most moms I know would say, I would rather live and never see my child and know they survived than to go home and know that my child has died. And the Bible makes no commentary on that, doesn't describe that. But when I read it, I just find it, to be honest with you, I find it rather shocking. Did she not believe the prophet? Did she not believe this was for real? Did she not believe the child would really, or did she not care about the child? I don't know. But it kind of leaves me astonished that she went home after what the prophet has said. And they buried him, and all of Israel now mourns him. Now let me just comment on verses 19 and 20. If you read through the books of 1st and 2nd Kings, you find this phrase over and over and over again. At the end of a description of a king, usually we get an event or two from their life, and then we get this and everything else they did. When it says the Chronicles of the King, this is not the books of 1st and 2nd Chronicles. What it means here when it says Chronicles is the daily diary. So if you want to go to a presidential library today, so I'm originally from the state of Arkansas, so if you go to Bill Clinton's presidential library in Little Rock, they have like the log of what he did every day. Personally, I would find that to be the most boring of reading imaginable. Woke up, had 2 eggs and sausage and toast for breakfast. I mean, it's just a kind of a list of what they did during they would keep these. Matter of fact, it's so boring that the king in the book of Daniel couldn't go to sleep. And you know what he said? Bring out the book of the Chronicles of the King. Someone start reading it, it'll put me to sleep. Even the Bible says this is boring stuff. And so so it just, everything else he did, they're written in the books. And for 22 years, he was the king, and he died. So what I want us to see is that he's not learned from those that went before him. He should have done better. He should have known better. He should have learned better. But I'll be honest, we can in some sense give him a little bit of a pass. So what do you mean we can give him a little pass? Well, here's the reason I think that we can give him a little bit of a pass, but also understand kind of what the Bible is saying. So I'm going to ask, Greg Adams, could you come up and help me? So about 15 years ago, 2 of my children got involved in martial arts. It struck me after about 3 or 4 months that I'm driving them and sitting through class 3 days a week. If I'm going to sit there through class, we know you're taller than me. That's pretty much most dudes. I might as well join them. So 3 or 4 days a week of training, join them, and 2 of my children and I, after about 5 years, earned a black belt. I went on to get another one. And so here's what I want to say. When you start class, you start with one of these. This is a pants holder upper. It's just it's just a white belt, and there's meaning behind all the different colors and we won't go through all that. But you start with just a white belt. Now, if you see someone in class with a white belt, do you know what your assumption is? They're no better than any of the rest of you. They're going to kick about like you do. And they're going to punch about like you do. And they're going to look awkward and completely inexperienced. That's what that means. But on the other hand, someone has a black belt in class, you expect more of them, do you not? Okay, so just as an example, just grab this handle work. Okay, so if you grab too tight, I like to break something. So just a loose grab, just for demonstration. So if someone grabs you, you take them down, and then from here, of course, there are a number of things we can break. Or you'll grab this wrist. We'll do another one. Or one that you like see on TV a lot of times, they're here. Now, from here, there is a move where you push their knee down, and it's called a Paul Smith. I invented it. We actually come around and break their chest, their sternum, or hit them in the throat and kill them. Thanks. Now, just so you'll know, I can hurt, maim, or kill you dozens of ways. So don't mess with me. But here's what we see in this text. We have a new king of a new kingdom with no experience. In other words, what we have essentially is a white belt king. But if you are a white belt king, what should you do? You should pick a role model of somebody and say, I'm going to watch them and I'm going to learn from them. So he should have said, this is what David was like. My granddad. This is the kind of king he was. I should imitate this guy, right? And learn, and you would expect him to be better as time goes on, but he doesn't learn. Even though he should recognize, I'm very inexperienced, I have no idea, there's never been a king of these tribes, and so, but he doesn't learn. But the next guy should have been a black belt king. He is the king over an established kingdom. He is the king who has seen dad and granddad and he knows how things are supposed to be. And he has a room full of people who have worked with previous kings who can give him wisdom and advice of what they have learned from previous kings. Does this make sense? So now we're going to see Rehoboam. I know it gets confusing. I wish one guy's name was like Bob and one guy's name was like Tyrone or something like totally different. But instead we got Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Now here's the good news. When you have these, if you're not sure which one, you kind of cough at the first letter and then the rest of it, Rehoboam, all sounds the same. That's like if it's Elijah or Elisha, if you slur it just right, they assume you said the right one. So we got these two guys whose names rhyme, Jeroboam and Rehoboam. So now Rehoboam, who should be more experienced and should be better, verse 21. Now Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, reigned in Judah. So he has the southern two tribes. Rehoboam was 41 years old when he began to reign. And he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem, the city that the Lord had chosen out of all the tribes of Israel to put his name there. His mother's name was Naamah the Ammonite. And Judah did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and they provoked him to jealousy with their sins that they committed, more than all that their fathers had done. For they also built for themselves high places and pillars and Ashram on every high hill and under every green tree. And there were also male cult prostitutes in the land. They did according to all the abominations of the nations that the Lord drove out before the people of Israel. In the 5th year of King Rehoboam, Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem. He took away the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house. He took away everything. He also took away all the shields of gold that Solomon had made. And King Rehoboam made in their place shields of bronze and committed them to the hands of the officers of the guard who kept the door of the king's house. And as often as the king went into the house of the Lord, the guard carried them and brought them back to the guard room. Now the rest of the acts of Rehoboam and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? And there was war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam continually. And Rehoboam slept with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in the city of David. His mother's name was Naamah the Ammonite, and Abijam his son reigned in his place. Now, it's interesting that a big deal is made out of his mom, the Ammonite. She's mentioned at the beginning of the description of his reign. She's mentioned in the last verse. That may well be because she has brought a pagan influence into the land. Here's what Deuteronomy chapter 7 says. When the Lord your God brings you in the land that you're entering, take possession of it, and clears away many nations before you. The Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, the Termites. Oh no, sorry, they're on here. 7 nations more numerous and mightier than you. And when the Lord your God gives them over to you and you defeat them, then you must devote them to complete destruction. You shall make no covenant with them and show no mercy to them. You shall not intermarry with them, giving your daughters to their sons or taking their daughters for your sons, for they would turn away your sons from following me to serve other gods. Then the anger of the Lord would be kindled against you, and he would destroy you quickly. But thus shall you deal with them. You shall break down their altars and dash in pieces their pillars and chop down their Ashram and burn their carved images with fire. Now let me just say a couple things here when the Bible talks about don't marry people from these other nations. The fascinating thing is when you study marriage in the Bible, there are actually only a couple of rules. One of them is a female marries a male, and vice versa, and there are no other options. A second one is that it's intended to be for life. The third one is to be a believer to a believer or an unbeliever to an unbeliever. That's it. There are no other rules. The Bible says nothing about interracial marriage because it's acceptable before God. The Bible says nothing about age differences in marriage because it's mostly acceptable before God. I think all of us would say we don't want a 60-year-old marrying an 8-year-old. I mean, there's some kind of stuff there about kids. But the reality is, it does not matter. None of that matters because it's all acceptable to God as long as you're both believers. If you are a believer, you do not marry an unbeliever because they will pull you away from serving the Lord. So the purpose here is not to say you can't marry somebody who's an Ammonite. You can't marry someone who serves the gods of the Ammonites. So the fact that she's mentioned twice probably indicates she brought all these in. And the fact that Deuteronomy 7, the same sins are mentioned here, probably indicates her influence on Rehoboam and leading the country to do all these things. Now let's talk a little bit about the sin that they commit here. What does it mean when it says in verse 22 that they provoke the Lord to jealousy? For us, jealous is a bad thing. Jealous is somebody who's out of control. Over the top, controlling, dominating. They make movies on Lifetime about this. The whack job boyfriend that's overly jealous. That's not the idea in the Bible. The idea of jealous is, I know who is mine and I don't share them. So my wife and I are to be jealous of each other, meaning we don't share each other with other people. Our marriage relationship is exclusive to her and to me, and we do not violate it. So in the Bible, God's the husband, Israel's the bride. Later, it's the image of Christ and the church. And so God says, you're mine, and I'm not going to share you with pagan gods. To just kind of put it blank, God says, my relationship with you is not an open marriage. Somebody should say amen. Like God says, you're my bride, and you are mine, and I don't want you out there. So that's the idea of jealousy. And there are three things that they do that are mentioned here. They build high places, pillars and Ashram, and they have male cult prostitutes. Now, high places are where they would worship Baal, because they believe that Baal rode on the clouds, and so if you're up high, you get closer to him. I am so glad that we serve a God who is with us everywhere. And we don't got to go somewhere to be close to him. And so, but these were places where Baal worship happened. The pillars and the Ashram is actually, it's the wife of Baal or his girlfriend. Live-in lover is probably a better way to describe it. And so they're worshiping Baal, the male deity, and Asherah, the female deity. And so they're up there worshiping these pagan gods that all the Canaanites worship. And that part's pretty easy to comprehend. But what in the world is, verse 24, talking about a male cult prostitute? Well, I'll give you the really brief version. 95% of the people lived on a family farm. That means that almost everybody in the country made a living by raising their own food. When you live in a country that has no natural water source, you go, what about the Jordan River? It wasn't until till the middle of the 20th century that we had the technology to get water from the Jordan River all the way up to the fields. So for most of history, there's no water. The only source of water was rain. Now, in most ancient cultures, they believed that their deities were related to their source of life. So what kind of god is Baal? He's a rain god. So the idea was the rain fertilizes the ground, and then the ground brings forth the fruit. That's why it talks about the fruit of the womb. The man would plant the seed, and then the fruit would come forth. That was the imagery that they had. So Baal rides on a cloud because he's a rain god. He's a storm god. So it is a fertility religion. So if we want to celebrate the rain fertilizing the earth, then we need to mimic that by having a fertility rite. So what you would do is you would plant your field, And then you would go up to the high place, to the temple of Baal, and you would pay your money. And you would pay for either a female priestess, which is a prostitute, and you would sleep with her to ensure the fertility of your fields. Or you could hire a male prostitute and sleep with him, and that would ensure I don't know quite how they got to that, making the field fertile. But that would ensure the fertility of your fields. So in other words, all of these are pagan worship. And he says, you have brought all of these in to my land, to my people, and you are worshiping them. So we have the punishment now, beginning of verse 25. Shishak, king of Egypt, is going to come up. He takes away all their gold shields, and the description of these is in 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 17. There were 200 7-pound shields. So 200 shields of 7 pounds of gold and 300 shields of 3.5 pounds of gold. I don't know about you, but that's a lot of gold. And so they've had to replace them now with a lower version, with the bronze. In other words, the idea of the gold shields, I'll be honest with you, gold shields don't work well in battle. So they were there to be decorative. They were there to show off their achievements and accomplishments. But instead, now all they have is bronze. I don't know if y'all ever watched the show MASH, but there's season 9, episode 18. But anyway, they have to perform surgery on a man that's been injured in the field of combat. And when he wakes up from surgery, they tell him, say, you're probably never going to be able to use your legs again. You'll probably never walk again. But we didn't have to amputate them. You'll have them, may not be using them, but maybe with therapy, they kind of go this thing. And he says, why does my hand feel numb? Well, you've lost a little of the feeling in your right arm, but it'll still function. And the guy gets very distraught and upset. He goes, look, I don't care about my legs. I need my hands. I make a living as a concert pianist. God has a way sometimes of his punishment coming to our point of pride and success. And the gold shields are a point of pride. They're a symbol of success. And so God brings his punishment on them for that. Now, both of these kings have an opportunity, and they fail. And I'll be honest with you, for years, I would read about these people, and this is what I thought. If I was there, I wouldn't have done that. How many of you have ever read something in the Bible and thought, if I was there, I wouldn't have done that? Okay, and there's a command against lying. So either most of you have not read the Bible, or you're lying. You read, you think, oh, I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have worshiped that golden calf. I wouldn't have gone up on the high places. I wouldn't have done that. That's the way I always kind of, man, I'm telling you, I'd have been at the empty tomb when Jesus came out. I know none of those 12 guys were there, but if I was one of the disciples, I'd have been there. I'd have believed him that he was going to rise again. I wouldn't have denied him if I was Peter. Oh, if you were just slightly as righteous as you think you are. And over the years, I've come to realize that's not really, probably if I was there, I'd have messed up too. And that's what's so frightening, but also is the message that the Bible is pushing on us. So here is kind of, sort of the way I see it. That's a generation. This is a generation. What should this generation learn from this generation? How to be better, right? How to live better, how to serve God better. I mean, this generation should teach this one. Deuteronomy tells us to teach your children. And then, what should happen here? Kind of what we think of, what we would hope is that this generation would help this one to be better, and then this one, with Grandma and Grandpa's help, would help this one to be better, and then they would help this one too. Okay, y'all not sure, so let's go again. To another generation. So we would think that, that this generation would be, that's sort of kind of the way we would expect it to happen. And so as we move through time, we have generation, and another generation, and we would expect them to get better. But have y'all seen our world? Do you really think that down here we're any better than they were in 1 Kings 14? Sometimes I think we're worse. I feel like we're going backwards. Why is that? Do you know why? Because we don't learn. We read about what they did, but we don't learn from them. We see the mistakes of the past, but we don't learn from them. So what is the answer? The answer is twofold. The first answer is we desperately need the grace of Jesus Christ. We need it just as badly here as they needed it there. They sinned and needed to be forgiven by the death and resurrection of Jesus. We sinned and we need to be forgiven by the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's the first answer, is the unbelievable grace of God. Because if God's grace stopped anywhere in here, everybody after that would be in severe trouble. So we desperately need the grace of God. The second thing is we want to train and teach the next generation not to make the same mistakes of the past. And we want to pray for them that God would help them to do better. What parent doesn't want their child to be more successful than them? Any normal parent wants their child to be more successful than them. But I don't think we need to think of success in terms of career and education and that sort of kind of success. We need to think, I want my children to be more successful in walking with God than I have been. I want to see them surpass me in my walk with Christ. And I want to see my grandchildren surpass them. I don't want to see the same mistakes showing up over and over and over and over and over again. I plead with you to talk to your children and your grandchildren, and if you live around long enough, your great-grandchildren, about how great it is to walk with Jesus, and to pray for them that they would do better, that they would do what 1 Corinthians chapter 10 tells us, that they would learn from those that have gone before. I can't tell you how personally frustrating it is in my own life to read something like 1 Corinthians 14 and to think, gee whiz, here we are, about 2,800, almost 3,000, about 2,900 years later. And we still haven't learned. We still do the same things. So it doesn't matter whether you're new, white belt, or you've been at it a while, black belt. We desperately need the grace of God to help us not to repeat the same mistakes of those that have gone before us.